The fourth wall is a term used in fiction or media in which an imagined wall separates the actors or characters from the audience watching them. Breaking the fourth wall refers to these actors acknowledging the audience in some way.
Is someone watching me?
Or the fact that it is a production or a work of fiction, calling attention to things such as the world's elements not actually being real or realistic.
You can unlock any door, like from the video games.
In the context of Final Fantasy or video games in general, the term can refer, for example, to the characters being aware that they are in one, acknowledging the player or a typical gameplay element that exists for the player's sake.
Make you mine.
A common way for it is when the game is teaching the player how to play in different tutorials that usually involve the mention of buttons or certain actions from the player so the character can act accordingly.
Oh, if you want the title of protagonist that badly?
But there's other cases of breaking the fourth wall through the history of Final Fantasy games, so I'll be showcasing some examples.
You know, people didn't pay good money for this game to watch me lose.
One of the most unreal places to exist in Final Fantasy history is the developer's office in the Final Fantasy IV universe, a secret location originally at the Dwarven Castle, through a hidden passage in the Lalihof pub. As its name implies, this is an office with a handful of colorful NPCs, such as the likes of Ken Narita, sleeping around because of the amount of workload, Nobuo Uematsu, offering to teach us how to play music, and of course the red chocobo called Hironobu Sakaguchi, with an always welcome advice. As you can see, every character in here is part of the actual Square's development team of the game existing in its universe. You can say they are canon to the series, now that people take that term very seriously. And one of the earliest aspects of fourth wall breaking with people in real life being represented with their real names and jobs in a game. And funny enough, it can be a common practice in RPGs, as that's something that happens in Pokemon games many times, with the Game Freak office having its location in places like Kanto or Unova. In a similar manner, although in a more expected case, things like this can be seen in an MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV, as it's a constantly updated game with a big focus on community and connection with the development team. So it's common to see seasonal or anniversary events like the one called The Rising happening in the game where a mysterious NPC called the Wandering Minstrel makes an appearance.
Cute. Oh, no, my memories!
And as you progress on those quests, you find out he is supposed to be Naoki Yoshida, or Yoshi P, director of the game.
Do you hear this music? It's not you. Hello.
As said before, one thing most games share in common is the implementation of tutorials at the start of the game or while introducing new stuff. For that, some players prefer to go ahead and experience things on their own, learning about status effect or magic properties, through trial and maybe errors. But even then, the option to go to a specific place to learn about all of this before getting in danger still exists for those who need it. And in Final Fantasy earlier games, this was known as the Beginner's Hall, and the approach given to it was a group of NPCs that will explain the many features of that particular game, as if those are part of the world normally, acknowledging the existence of abilities, jobs, or battle mechanics. Take Final Fantasy V for example. This place, known as the Greenhorn's Club, is a house at Tulle. On it, the wizard-looking elders will talk to you about very specific game mechanics, like finding chests around, and even the mimic ones, as if they are common reassurance in the world. And some have to do with the very specific job abilities that Final Fantasy V is known for. Things such as finding secret passages in the black part of the screen that only the Thief job class can see, or rather, make the player see them on screen. In Final Fantasy VI, this place would exist in this house at the entrance of Narsh, and interactions will be even bigger and more on the nose, as this game had more status effect to showcase for example, with NPCs showing you how the glow around you and its color is a sign of each status you get in battle, acknowledging of course the idea of battle effects and thus game mechanics. And in Final Fantasy VII, there's this recurring place at Sector 7 slums, where Cloud can visit people training and he will aid them and the player with the mechanics of this particular game, like how they showcase limit breaks in a charming way. But the most memorable and fun bit for me here is how, this being the first 3D game, new exploration icons will exist, just like the save points, or the triangles that show which object you can interact with, or where you can leave the screen to another place. One of them is the famous pointy finger, that shows the player where the characters is in case you're not finding them on screen. And at this hole, to explain that feature, we have this interaction of Cloud being confused about the finger following him around. There's also some interactions with the chest and the save point, which leads to the next category of fourth wall breaking, the interaction of characters with the user interface. User interface, or UI, is the way of showing visual cues that help the player to follow the intended course of action in any given game, from pop-up messages to icons to keep track of. So you can see how the idea of characters in-game interacting or reacting to this would be considered a case of immersion breaking, on purpose of course, as was the case with Cloud and his clover friend. One of the recurring gameplay components have been the save points, for example. Initially, spots where the character can use a tent to sleep and save, but eventually they turn into physical objects that are very easy to identify to the player, from the mentioned one in FF7 to straight up crystals in FF12, for example. In Final Fantasy VIII in particular, these save points take the form of the garden's logo surrounded by two rotating rings or circles. And during the section and start of Battle of the Gardens, where our seed forces of Balam Garden fight against Edea's Galvadian army, if you are observant enough, you'll notice there's a save point outside the infirmary when there wasn't one before. If you hang around that area for a bit, you can interact with a person from the group called the Supply Team Personnel, who will kneel beside the point and say, acknowledging its existence and probably its purpose, which luckily we don't have to think too hard about its implications. In Final Fantasy X, we have spheres that simulate a Blitzball court, which is fitting as you can both save and play Blitzball through them. While this particular feature is not being acknowledged by characters around, and mostly everyone acts as if they don't exist, we can have a couple of scenes where they do. For example, after the events of Macalania Temple, Waka the 23rd gives a brief wave before apparently using the sphere to teleport away, which I find it fitting, because Waka is basically a character that exists only for a game mechanic purpose, which is to have access to shops at most times. In a similar way to Chocolina in Final Fantasy XIII-2, or Chatley in Final Fantasy VII Remake, with them being everywhere, even at the end of times, which is pretty funny.
You there? Are you lost too? I don't know how I ended up here, and I can't seem to find a way out. I really need your help to get out of this bind. First, buy something from my shop. Then, look for an exit so I can get out of here.
So these type of characters are bound to have moments like this. The don't think too much about it type of moments. More or less self-aware about them. I mentioned the Final Fantasy XII crystals before, so might as well add that they sometimes act as a mimic. You think you are safe, and suddenly instead of recovering HP, the crystals start attacking us, and it's an enemy called the Crystal Bug. But as far as I know, this is not acknowledged by the characters, so there's not an obvious fourth wall breaking in there. But there are some other sneaky interactions of characters with the UI, in the form of Final Fantasy V sprite animations, as they are full of charm and doing funny movements to express scenes or conversations with no text. Like when Galuf, who has amnesia, sees his granddaughter again recovering his memories, and the way to show that is him throwing the big question mark above his head to represent not being confused anymore. Fun things like that. One appropriate last mention about save points has to be the Final Fantasy IX ones. These are straight up the Mughals of the world, saving your progress in their big books. And also lead us to the next category of immersion breaking, the NPCs and their dialogues. Maybe the most obvious or simple way to break the fourth wall in big RPG games is to give very referential text in some specific moment or with an NPC you can interact with. It's a good way to fill dialogue around the world while keeping it entertaining and not necessarily crucial to the adventure or plot if you want. So here are some fun examples. While walking around Lindblom after the Festival of the Hunt in Final Fantasy IX, you can meet and talk to a lady you may remember called Grandma Popurrí. At this particular time, she'll ask Zidane if he's enjoying what he's doing, and you have the chance to be a little bit rude and reply, and probably retroactively offend more people than just one simple game NPC. But hey, you got the fourth wall talk. Final Fantasy XIII-2 is probably the first game in the series that had active DLC content, and most of it is in the form of Colosseum battles, which involve many known entities or characters from the series as challenges to fight. One of them is Gilgamesh, who will acknowledge to the player that he is in fact a downloadable content, with the following line.
You'd never download this part of the game, and I'd be stuck in digital limbo. See these weapons?
One of the sweetest moments, in my opinion, is the end of the latest expansion for Final Fantasy XI, which as a reminder is also an MMO. So it centers around constant support from the developers and a big community-focused experience. So during the final scenes of the Rhapsodies of Vana'diel expansion, the character Iroha will kneel in sign of respect and proceed to thank the player for your service these past 14 years, which is the same amount of years between the start of the game and the release of this last expansion, acting more as a farewell but also a message full of gratitude from the creators to the community for the constant and long support and enjoyment of the game. Also, spin-off games like World of Final Fantasy can get sneaky with this. And this is probably the most explicit of them all, where this conversation topic is used for comedic purposes, with a whole scene involving puns and very explicitly fourth walls being broken here and there.
Shortcuts. The kids call it fast travel. You get to zip around every which way using one of those gooey doohickeys. Yep.
I don't think you're allowed to go there.
So what?
On par with the tone of the game itself.
I'll still eat it.
We're not talking about food.
In Final Fantasy VI, there's a couple of these moments with mainly two of the party members we can get. The first one would be the introduction of Sabin, the monk of the group. You first meet him during a fight against his trainer partner Vargas, and while joining the fight, he would talk to the player to teach them about how to perform his blitz attack, which is unique to him, and even reassures the player that they have enough time to perform it, as it's an ability that requires a specific set of inputs from the player to perform, similar to a fighting game special move. And then we have the always charming character Relm Aroni, a very upbeat young kid with the abilities of drawing enemies to use their abilities against them, and someone who likes to tease or be very playful with everyone around. At the Esper Caves, while attempting to get accepted into the party despite her grandpa's efforts, she has an exchange with another very colorful character, the enemy octopus Ultros. In there, they end up doing some sort of comedy sketch, with Relm wanting to make a drawing of Ultros and being overly dramatic when she gets rejected, so she convinced him. And Locke, who is participating in that exchange, breaks the fourth wall as he approaches the screen and says to himself while looking to the player, "The only thing that was lacking during this part was the use of some sound effects like the drum rolls." With that being said, one could argue that Final Fantasy VI setting as a whole can be a little bit self-aware of being a work of fiction, as sometimes this is treated as a big theater play, if we take in consideration these interactions between characters and the screen or audience, or things like the ending sequence having some sort of staff role, but with the characters being presented as if they are actors filling the roles of the characters themselves instead. But I think that's just a cute aesthetic thing that fits really well with games in general, like in Super Mario 3. Another setting like that you can find which is more on the nose is the plot of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, On it, you start as a normal group of kids bonding a little bit talking about books and fiction, with one of them mentioning how he loves the series Final Fantasy. Well, that night something strange happens, and can you believe it? They are isekai'd into another world, which is the Ivalice world of Final Fantasy series, with some of them wanting to stay there, making this game the most relatable game of all time. And to finish, I leave you the most hyped moment of Final Fantasy XVI.
The early fantasy here is yours, and we shall be its final witness.
Which is also funny because in Japanese they use the line Kyukyoku no Genso,
なら俺は創世という究極の幻想を打ち破る
which is, if you want, the literal translation of the series since the start, even if it wasn't intended to be.
国語の先生か英語の先生かな、が黒板に「ファイナルファンタジー」って書いて、これは究極の幻想だ
かっこいい
ってその生徒に言ったらしいんですよ、その生徒さんがはがきかな当時だからで、そういう先生から教わったんですけども、そうですかっていうのが来た瞬間、これ使おうと思って。
And with that we are at the end of the video. Let me know if you remember one moment like this that I didn't mention here. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy some Final Fantasy. And I'll see you later. Love you.
This sounds like you're having fun.